Are you a new player out there that maybe want to try the Elder Scrolls Online for the first time, or a returning player and wondering what's the best overall class and build for beginners? I've got the answer for you. Welcome back, gang. It's Deltia from Deltiasgaming.com, and after leveling over 30 characters with thousands of hours of gameplay, the answer is very clear. It's a Templar. Magic Templar, in fact. Why the Magpar? If we have to ask ourselves what would make the most beginner-friendly best class in the game, it would have to be the following: resource sustain, durability, damage, simplicity, and massive self-healing. And that's exactly what the Templar has. I'll never forget the first time I played ESO in 2014 during an open beta weekend. I was frustrated with Star Wars: The Old Republic in that you couldn't heal yourself as a DPS. You needed a pocket healer, and I'd constantly lose war zones because another team had a healer and we didn't. That's what attracted me to ESO in the first place, and the Templar specifically, a class that could heal, do damage, and tank. I remember being on Bleak Rock Isles hitting the Unmorph Puncturing Strikes ability and thinking, man, that's pretty cool. Big spear, hits like a truck, nice. Then the morph choice came up. Heals you, quote unquote, based on the percentage of damage done. WTF, say it out loud with me. An AoE spammable that hits hard single target, 8-meter radius, snare, and back in those days, stuns that heals you for 40% of the damage done. Yep, I'm taking that one. I was hooked, and this is the core to the Templar. Its unique advantage over every other class. Your main spammable is great for both single target and AoE damage, but it also heals you. Templars are rewarded for a simplistic build revolving around making your sweeps hit harder, reducing incoming damage, and amplifying your healing. So you can just sit there, click one button, and face tank nearly anything in the game. To further this point, let me explain how the passives from Puncturing Sweep, Skill Tree, Adric Spear play into this for your understanding. The Spear Wall passive will grant you minor protection after activating sweeps, reducing damage done by 5% for 6 seconds. You can take advantage of the sweep's damage reduction even further by choosing a race like High Elf or Ultimer for their Spell Recharge passive. When you use an ability with a channel or a cast time, aka Puncturing Sweeps, you take 5% less damage. That's 10% less damage done just hitting your main spammable that heals you for 40% of the damage done. Want to be even tankier by slotting one skill on your bar? Throw on your bar Revealing Flare from the Alliance War PvP skill line support, which grants major protection for simply slotting this ability, granting another 10% damage reduction without the need for even activating the skill. Now you'll have 20% damage reduction while casting your main spammable. Another key passive in the Adric Spear skill line that gives you a massive advantage in endgame PvE and PvP DPS is Piercing Spear, increasing your critical damage done by 10% just for slotting the Adric Spear ability. And Burning Light passive, a staple in Templar DPS, gives an extra bit of damage, physical or magic based on whatever's higher, when you hit 4 strikes in rapid succession. Jabs or sweeps, whichever morph you hit, hits within 4 times in a second, giving an extra source of damage. Within 1 second, that's 5 sources of damage. This provides incredible burst in both PvE and PvP and is very simple for newer or advanced players. You're rewarded for hammering down on sweeps, and we've only covered one ability in the entire class kit for the Templar. Are you starting to see the point? Sweeps, or as a lot of folks like to call it jabs, is the single strongest ability in the game, is the foundation of our build and the premise behind the strongest class in ESO. Now that I've got you convinced to play the Magpar, it's the GOAT for the beginners, let's talk about how to get off to a good start in case you don't know this. I have a very detailed guide on beginners in the Elder Scrolls Online, walking you through step A, B, and C, how to do things, and I'll put it in a link in the description, but I'm going to assume some people watching this do not know. What you want to do is prioritize when you start a new character is going and unlocking all the guild skill lines. That's Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, and Undaunted. You're going to have a home faction town, Glenumber, Daggerfall Covenant, Auradon, and Stone Falls for the Ebonheart Pack. In your starter town, like in Glenumber, Daggerfall, you can find the Mages Guild, Fighters Guild, and Undaunted is in the Tavern. Make sure to go and progress each of these skill lines. Just doing a quick introduction and some dialogue will grant the skill line. You want to do this straight away because some of the progress is not retroactively rewarded, so it's really important to get a good start. While you're there, you're going to want to unlock what's called crafting writs. There should be a little vendor outside the Fighters Guild and the Mages Guild area called Milnith, the Fighters Guild. This is a great way to earn a ton of extra materials and a lot of experience and a lot of gold in the end game by doing quick quest turn-ins while you're doing crafting. Plus, you'll need to level alchemy at endgame for medicinal use as it extends potions' effects, which are very important for survivability, damage, and resource sustain. More on that later. But pick up the crafting writs and start doing them. It's really good later on at endgame to make a ton of gold and plus simple, easy experience. Next up is armor once you've got guilds taken care of. So there's going to be a central area with merchants in every single main town. These shops will sell white or base level gear that don't have traits or any fancy setups, and that's just fine for the new or beginning player. You're going to need some of these armor pieces to actually unlock the skill line because it doesn't unlock unless you equip 3 or more. So what I'd recommend doing is buying 3 heavy, 3 medium, 3 light, and equipping them just to unlock the skill line. And it's very, very cheap. You can get it straight away. Once I've unlocked all of the skill lines for the armor, and then I put 5 light armor on, 1 medium, 1 heavy. You want to do this because you want to progress and level those throughout the entire leveling experience, as heavy armor is very useful if you plan on tanking or PvP later. Medium armor is quite relevant in top-end PvE DPS due to a couple passives, agility and dexterity. And you don't want to reach level 50 just to realize you're going to have to go back and level up all this armor skill line, and it'll be really intensive and boring. Speaking of that, skills are up next. You want to do something similar on your skills, and that's putting 1 skill per each class skill line on your bar throughout your entire leveling up playthrough. You can rotate them on and off as you unlock new ones, level them, and morph them, but you always want to keep 1 from each of the class skill lines. So the first one you get in Adric Spear is your go-to, Puncturing Strikes, which will morph into Puncturing Sweeps. Next up will be Dawn's Wrath, taking Sunfire into Reflective Light. And then a core one, Restoring Light, Rush Ceremony, your big burst heal. I prefer Honor the Dead, the single target and resource sustain. Now you're also going to get 1 extra free skill that you don't even have to spend a skill point on, and that's from the World skill line, Soul Magic. The first skill up is Soul Trap, and you can morph that into Consuming Trap and use it at the beginning or throughout your entire playthrough for incredible resource sustain. And you're also going to want to unlock the Restoration Staff and Destruction Staff skill line in the same vendor, and then you can throw 1 Destruction Staff skill line on your bar to progress that even further. So now you'll be progressing 1 weapon, 3 of your class skills, along with your armor. It's a great way to start off the game. As you're progressing, you're going to hit level 10, and level 10 is going to give you some group finder options. It's going to allow you to do the dungeons, and it's going to allow you to do battlegrounds, along with Cyrodiil quest. Cyrodiil is the big, huge, expansive PvP area. You're going to get 2 skill points for doing an introduction quest. I probably wouldn't hang out there if I were level 10 and unfamiliar. The 2 things you're going to want to do at least once a day is the daily battlegrounds and the daily normal random dungeon. These reward a massive amount of experience, and you'll get a ton of good gear actually, and even some skill points as you rank up your alliance rank through PvP. In dungeons, completing the quest turn-ins will give you a skill point. So balance that with the main story, the side quests, collecting sky shards, doing delves, dolmens, and world bosses. And when you reach max level, you'll be at a much better place because you'll have a lot of skill points, your skills will be leveled, your armor will be leveled, and you'll be ready to go. Now, let's assume you have a good understanding of the game going forward. Let's move into the skills and take a deep dive on how and why they work so well. I started over on PCEU about in the middle of 2021 with limited champion points, gear, skill points, and etc. I had to adapt my build just like you, the beginner player that may struggle with resource sustain, damage, healing, and survivability. Here's how my skills look, and the most important reason is why I'm using them. Take this as a template and change as you see fit as you progress through the Elder Scrolls Online. First ability up is Inner Light. This is the morph of Mage Light from the Mages Guild skill line. Slotting this skill increases our max magic and gives us spell critical buff on our front bar. You'll also get more max magic and magic recovery via the magic controller passive. More max magic equals more damage as a magic dealer, and that's simply the reason we set and forget this ability. You're not going to actually click and cast this ability as it really doesn't do much for you. It's just a way to amplify, get more damage on your front bar. In PvP, I do swap this out for this skill, Toppling Charge, as a gap closer and a stun, and that makes a really good ability while you're leveling just to get some mobility and stun mobs, taking pressure off of you. And keep this in mind, at endgame, most players use what's called spell power potions in order to maintain 100% certainty on uptime for critical buffs like spell power and spell critical. Speaking of toppling charge, there's a nice trick with toppling charge, which I'll explain a little bit later. It has a chance to set enemies off balance, and they have a circle above their head. You can do this also with a lightning staff using unstable wall of elements, which I'm going to cover later. This is important to know, especially as a new player. So when you toppling charge and get those little circles around their head and set them off balance, what this allows you to do is complete a fully charged heavy attack with your staff. If it consumed the off balance and they're stunnable, it will stun them. But most importantly, completing a fully charged heavy attack will consume the off balance and will return you 2 times the normal magic sustain. So you can combine this for even crazier sustain with the back bar restoration staff, which amplifies this effect further via the cycle of life passive. Fully maxed out increases the resource sustain of fully charged heavy attacks by 30%. So if you struggle with sustain, the toppling charge off balance fully charged heavy attack is a really cool way to be able to sustain that doesn't require champion points, gear, nothing. Just basic understanding of mechanics. Moving on, and that's the next ability up, and one of my favorites in the entire game, Purifying Light, Morph of Backlash from Dawn's Wrath skill line. This is your go-to ability for damage and survival. It works like a balloon, soaking up damage to a certain point and then exploding for that amount. When it explodes, it's going to place a healing circle on the enemy's feet, which is great when staying in melee range or providing off healing to the tank and or your group in melee range. This ability also activates a key passive from the Dawn's Wrath, and that's Illuminate, which grants minor sorcery 10% more spell damage. This scales an effectiveness based off your spell damage, which is great for new players because spell damage sets are very easy to obtain. If you don't know what scaling is, simply put, it gets better and better the more spell damage you have. Consider this your priority damage ability to cast first, whether you're in PvE or PvP. It's going to soak up damage, explode, and heal you for 6 seconds if you're in melee range. The next skill up is a flex option, but important to understand, and that's the buff Minor Force. Minor Force increases your critical damage done by 10%. ESO now has a cap of 125% of critical damage, with the base amount that you get with no multipliers being 50% or damage on a critical strike. ESO does not have a cap on critical chance. However, a normal player tries to find a balance between critical strike and not going above the 125% critical cap on damage. Minor Force essentially is the key for big DPS in PvE, and most folks have nowhere near the cap, but you'll need to have an understanding of this and check out Fully Buff in your character window. If you hit the Advanced Stats tab, scroll down a little bit, it will actually show you what your crit damage multiplier is. Leave enough room for Major Force, which is a really important buff in PvE, typically provided by healers and tank via Warhorn skill from the Assault skill line. That's going to give you 20% for a short period. You're doing this and kind of calculating this towards the end of the game so you have a good understanding getting the most bang for your buck in terms of stats. That's max stats like max magic, spell damage, critical chance, and critical damage. You don't want to have any spillover and wasted territory. Fortunately for you, the build that I'm using, the gear, you're not going to touch anywhere near that, but just to be aware. So we're going to need to get Minor Force because it adds so much damage to our build, and the most logical way to get it is Barb Trap, Morph of Trap Beast from the Fighters Guild skill line. There is another source called Channel Acceleration from the Sigic Order that can be tedious to obtain and worth looking into at the end game, but Fighters Guild, you're going to have to apply this trap in melee range. It takes 1.5 seconds to arm, and then triggers, doing bleed damage over 18 seconds and granting you Minor Force for 18 seconds. Our trap is also going to cost stamina, not magicka, which is also important. It does immobilize targets, which can be useful starting out, and it's quite easy to obtain being in the Fighters Guild, not in the Sigic Order. There's another reason and important thing to understand with the Fighters Guild, and that's why we slot it on our front bar. It's the passes, if you're catching a theme here, that you need to understand as a new player, so when you swap things in and out, you can understand what you're gaining or losing. One reason you slot it on your main front bar is the Slayer passive, increasing your weapon and spell damage by 3% for each Fighters Guild ability slotted. Combine this skill on our front bar along with Mages Guild, now we have 5% extra max magic and 3% extra spell damage just for slotting 2 skills, making us hit harder without even activating anything. Also, banish the Wicked passive from the Fighters Guild. You generate 3 ultimate whenever you kill an enemy. So if you're especially playing solo or in dungeons or something, you're killing a lot of trash mobs, your ultimate will rack up pretty quick with this passive, giving you more damage, allowing you to use your stamina pool to apply a certain buff, an important buff, and giving you a lot more crit damage for a very long time. This is a flex spot though, and in PvP, I usually slot the Mage's Guild skill Degeneration on my front bar to get a spell damage buff. But I have a separate video on my PvP magpar, link in the description for more details on that. Next up is our main spammable, Sweeps, which I've ranted and raved about ad nauseum. Your ceiling on Templar is how to light attack weave with the 1-second channeled ability. Most folks don't have a channeled ability as their main spammable. So when you activate a skill like Crushing Shock from the Destruction Staff skill line, it instantly goes off, whereas Sweeps takes 1 second to cast fully. Then you need to light attack, which procs your ultimate generation and your weapon damage enchant, and then simultaneously cast another Sweeps. Believe it or not, light attack weaving in between skills can be your top damage source for even the best players. And yes, I have a separate video on that which shows my mouse and explains this more in detail. The too long didn't read here is to think of light attack weaving like a heartbeat. You're almost simultaneously clicking your light attack and then your next ability back to back, which weaves in a little bit more damage from the light attack. You're doing this in between every single ability and adds so much damage. If you're more interested in that, check that video out because it will really add a lot of your damage, and that's what the top players do. Next up is your executable ability, and you'll want to use when the enemy is at or around about 35% health. It replaces Sweeps as your main spammable. Executes, they're going to do more damage the lower health mobs get. So at 100%, it's going to hit like a noodle. 35, it's going to hit okay. 5% of their health, it's going to hit like a Mack truck. So their base morph is Radiant Destruction from Dawn's Wrath. There's two strong options here. Radiant Glory is my recommendation for new players because it heals you based on the damage done, while Radiant Oppression does more damage based on missing max magic. I can't tell you how much I recommend Radiant Glory because when you go into execute, you'll be exposed, whether you're in PvE or PvP. Just sitting there channeling and having a massive bit of healing goes over very well. As you become more experienced, you're going to want to switch this out for the other morph to do more damage, or if you have a coordinated group with a pocket healer. Also, for folks that want a quote-unquote one-bar build, what I would do in this position is put Living Dark, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, on my front bar rather than my back. That way you'll have a strong heal when taking damage, and combined with Sweeps, even a shield like Harness Magic to replace Barb Trap, you could solo nearly anything. That would be Inner Light, Purifying Light, Harness Magic, Puncturing Sweeps, and Living Dark. You'd have a great one-bar solo build. Now comes the ultimate choice on our front bar, and there's a couple of solid options. Number one for sustained PvE damage is Flawless Dawnbreaker, Morpha Dawnbreaker from the Fighter's Guild skill line. The performance of Dawnbreaker is very good now that it grants massive spell damage boost, 300 for 20 seconds. Not to mention the added spell damage from the Slayer passive, and this is a great ultimate to use on the front bar that's low cost. But when you're a beginner, you're not going to have access to Dawnbreaker. In a very friendly version of this, or solo ultimate choice, I prefer Crescent Sweep from the Adrix Spear skill line. It's extremely low cost ultimate and hits very hard, plus it pulses with damage. It's almost up so frequently, it's like another ability, and it's going to hit really hard in front of you. So when I start out, I prefer Crescent Sweep just because of its low cost and that you can get it so early at the game. Later on, top-end PvE DPS, look for Flawless Dawnbreaker. Next up is our back bar, and we're going to use a Lightning Staff as a beginner. Endgame players typically are going to go Fire because it does more damage overall, but Lightning Staff is great, and let me explain. The reason why Lightning Staff is much better for new players is because it's easier to land a fully charged heavy attack, especially when you need resources. Lightning, you hold it down, it finds a target, and you just sit there while it channels. It does AoE damage and locks onto the target without assistance. Lightning Staff also applies a different status effect with unstable wall called Concussed. This Concussed static effect will set enemies off balance, which we've already talked about, the little circles around their head. This is extremely useful because if you complete a fully charged heavy attack on an enemy, it will consume that status effect, you will stun non-bosses, but most importantly, again, return twice the resources. So when you're out of magic on your back bar, taking tons of pressure, you can just go, all I need to do is fully charge heavy attack. Then you apply a shield after your resource sustain is returned, put down unstable wall, set something off balance, rinse and repeat, do it again. This is your infinite sustain loop that does not require high-end gear, a skill, nothing, just knowledge and practice. Now in our back bar abilities, we're going to start left to right. First ability up is Channeled Focus. This is Rune Focus Morph, Restoring Light skill line. Channeled Focus gives you minor mending via the Sacred Ground passive, resource sustain, a small amount of healing while you're standing in the circle, and your armor buff for a very long time. The heal is based off your max health, so don't expect it to be significant, but even on a DPS build, I'm getting 1,000 a second roughly. Moreover, you can leave the circle and then come back in it and still get most of the benefits, and it costs nearly nothing. Consider this a flex spot on your back bar if you want something different. Another skill up that I absolutely love in both PvE and PvP is Living Dark, Morph of Eclipse from the Dawn's Wrath skill line. Living Dark, or as I call it, Bubble, puts a bubble on you for 6 seconds. This bubble will heal you every half second based on your spell damage or max health, whichever's higher. The healing is significant, especially when taking pressure. I can expect about 5,000 heals per second from this ability alone if multiple targets are beating on me. Now, if I combine this with my rune that generates around 1,000 to 1,500 heals per second, I'll have nearly 6,000 heals per second. Furthermore, applying Bubble and then a shield on top of it so your health won't dip any further, and you'll be able to face tank entire armies of mobs, even without meta gear or optimal champion points. The trick with the shield is to use it both reactively and preemptively, meaning when you know you're going to take a lot of damage, pop it for protection. Also, when you get hit, pop it for protection. Allow your healer to catch up and your rune to heal you. For newer players, I highly recommend double barring this skill or whatever your survivability tools is in the exact same position on both bars. So if I wanted the 3 key to be my survivability button, I would put it on the front and I would put it on the back. That way your muscle memory can take hold and you don't have to panic click depending on what bar you are. You want to work towards doing a second bar because it'll make you a much better player. But at the start, double bar your survivability skill. Trust me, it will allow you to not panic click and die. Next ability up is Harness Magic, Morph of Annulment, Light Armor skill line. What this is going to do is convert a portion of your magic into a ward, a shield that's going to absorb a lot of damage for a limited time, 6 seconds. It's going to be capped at 50% of your max health, but it's going to scale in effectiveness off of your max magicka, meaning more max magic, bigger shields. You'll notice that this 6-second duration syncs up very well with Living Dark. So this will prevent you from dipping in health. Living Dark will allow you to get healed. You can place them both on top of each other for incredible survivability. This is the skill that I would highly recommend you double bar in that 3 key or 5 or whatever works for you, because it allows you to catch up on heals, whether it's via rune, whether it's via sweeps, whatever it is. Putting this in the 3 key, the 5 key on both bars will allow you to click it, get caught up, and figure out what to do next. Also at endgame, if you're doing parsing or something else, you want to see how much damage you have, consider slotting Inner Light here, especially if you have a pocket healer, but I'd highly recommend to keep this on almost all times outside of parsing. Next ability up is Solar Barrage. Barrage is a damage added ability because it provides power to your light attacks and heavy attacks. So this is going to give you a damage pulse every 2 seconds around you in an 8-meter radius. And while it's active, it's going to increase your light and heavy attacks by 40%. Remember what we talked about with light attack weaving? This will add a lot of damage to your overall class. And plus, you're playing in melee anyway, so that pulse damage will be up a lot of the time. Next ability up is Unstable Wall of Elements from the Destruction Staff skill line, Wall of Elements base morph. What's going to happen with this ability is it's going to shoot out in an 18-meter radius, cost a bit of magic, and depending on what staff you have equipped will determine the status effect. Fire is going to be the most damage pound for pound, but as a new player, lightning is going to proc that concuss status effect, setting enemies off balance. Plus, it's much easier to land a fully charged heavy attack, so I'd highly recommend using lightning as a new player. You're going to work towards the VMA Maelstrom staff, which is obtained in a solo arena with an infused trait and spell damage. The reason folks use this setup is because you can get the extra spell damage proccing it while you swap bars. So even this status effect on the front bar will still keep on proccing a ton of spell damage. This is why you consider it your most important buff on your back bar, because of the increased spell damage even when you're on your front bar. The trick again, infuse trade on the back bar with the spell damage VMA Maelstrom Staff. This is the go-to at endgame. Next ability up is Destruction Staff Ultimate, and that's Elemental Rage. This is my preferred back bar ultimate, though you have some choices. The strength of this ultimate is the sheer damage in a small window with a massive radius. This is great for dungeons and areas with trash mobs and a lot of general mechanics of the fight. It's a big nasty burn. Another great option here that I use for parsing or something else is Mage's Guild Shooting Star. The strength of this ability is that the amount of single target damage is staggering, though it lacks radius and mobility. Plus the passive on the back bar goes a long way. When you're starting out, however, you're not going to have access to either of those, so I would go with the Dawn's Wrath Nova skill. And the morph that I prefer is the Solar Prison. This is going to deal more damage and stun enemies longer with that Grav Crush synergy, giving you great group utility, and something I use as a PvP healer to this day. And that's the skill. So the simple rotation is on your back bar. You want to pre-buff with your Rune Focus, Solar Barrage, and cast Unstable as your last ability. If you need more survivability before you jump in the fray, don't forget to apply Living Dark, but bar swap. On your front, you need to identify the main priority target, like a boss or a mini-boss, and apply Burning Light to it, light attack weaving in between. That's going to pop after 6 seconds, giving you massive healing. And next up is Barb Trap. As you close the distance and become in melee range, this is going to proc after 1.5 seconds, increasing your crit damage done, and just do about 3 puncturing sweeps. After about 3 puncturing sweeps, you're going to need to reapply your Purifying Light, bar swap, and then reapply your Solar and Blockade. While you're on your back bar, if you're taking a lot of pressure, cast a shield and or a bubble, especially if you need help healing, and then bar swap. And then it's kind of rinse and repeat. 3 sweeps, Purifying Light, 2 dots on the back bar. Keep up Trap in your focus, whatever bar you're on, and that's pretty much a simple rotation. Now let's switch gear and talk about the gear. So as a new player, I'm going to give you some really easy sets and some flexible options to obtain. The very first one is a Monster Helm Ice Heart. This is obtained in Dire Frost in the Gilron Undaunted trading vendor. What it's going to do when you do critical damage, it's going to give you a damage shield. It's going to absorb a lot of damage while starting. And while the shield holds, it's going to deal frost damage. Simply put, it does a little bit of damage, but also it protects you. Especially when playing in melee range, this is a fantastic choice till you get the hang of the game. As you progress in the game, there's a couple of other options. One that I like currently is Narayana. This comes from Crypta Hearts, and it's great single target or AoE once you learn survivability. If you're brand new to the game and you're not able to complete veteran dungeons, there's another set that you can run to give you a bunch of max stats, and that's Armor of the Trainee. This comes from the starter areas like Stros Mackay, Canarthy's Roost, Bleakrock Isles, Betnik, Balfonia, and those likes. The trait's going to be training, which is okay to start out, but really what it does is going to give you 2 pieces, 1 max health, 1 max magic. That's really going to help you with the survivability and just getting a bigger step. So start there, work towards Ice Heart, and then go Narayana as you progress throughout the game. Next up is Withered Hand. This is an overland set obtained in the base game Alakir, or you can buy it from guild traders. You get this from farming Delves, Dolmens, World Boss, and Chest. You're going to get a little bit of magic recovery, max magic, and max health. In the 5-piece, when you are in the area 28 meters, an enemy dies while you're in combat, you're going to heal for 1637 and gain magic for 1637 with a cooldown of 3 seconds. If you're a new player with low champion points and lack trials gear, this gives great sustain and healing when killing mobs. Is an ideal for new players because you're constantly going to have extra mobs to kill. Rarely are you ever going to do a single target fight. This is my go-to set when I started over on PCU. Now what you're going to work towards is progressing is replacing that with Mother's Sorrow on the body. Mother's Sorrow is simply just going to give you the most spell critical and 5-piece that you can have, and it comes in light armor. You can find this in the Deshaun Overland, and it's actually dirt cheap on the traders. Don't feel like you have to get the right trait, which is Divine. Just get any trait because you really just want the 5-piece act. So start with Withered Hand. As you progress and your sustain's pretty good, go with Mother Sorrow. Next 5-piece up is the War Maiden. This is going to be on your jewelry in your front bar weapon of choice. This is obtained in Vardenfeld or in guild traders pretty cheap. You're going to get spell critical, max magic, and weapon damage, with the 5-piece giving you 600 weapon damage and spell damage for your magic damage abilities. Thankfully for us, our main spamble is a magic damage. Purifying Light is magic damage, so we don't have a whole lot of elemental damage like a Dragonite. This is not going to apply to every single thing that you do, but it's going to apply to most of it. It's a really good alternative for some of the other endgame sets you can get a hold of. Speaking of endgame sets, one that is really good is Deadly Strikes. This is going to increase your channel damage and damage over time by 15%. So think about puncturing sweeps with 15% more damage. It's a lot. Now you can obtain this through Cyrodiil PvP vendor Bruma. So it's not exactly easy for people to get a hold of, or you can buy it on the trader, but it's something that I switched to in an endgame PvE loadout. Top tier DPS folks will tell you about Kinra's Wrath from Black Drake Village. This is extremely hard to maintain the 5 stacks, but it is something you're going to want to work towards as you progress through the game, and at least worth getting it collected. It can be really, really good for the top end player out there. And that leaves our back bar. So what I would recommend going with is Willpower, obtain an Imperial City, Dungeon Finder, or Guild Traders. On the back bar, you're only going to have the 2-piece active, which is going to give you the most max magic possible, 1752 on your back bar at endgame. Why that's relevant is your shield is on your back bar, Harness Magicka. Remember, shields scale off of max magic, so more max magic, the bigger shields you have, the more survivability you have. Now, as you progress through the game, you're going to want to do something called Veteran Maelstrom Arena and Arsenium, and replace this with that Destruction Staff on your back bar. Light and heavy attacks deal an additional 1353 damage when your Wall of Elements is up, which we've already talked about is critical to your overall damage. So if we look at a gear chart here, here's just a simple layout of what I have and why. Next up, let's talk about the miscellaneous things, and that's champion points. So the number one priority as a new player that you need to do as champion points is go for the preparation passive, and that is in the blue tree called the Warfare tree. If you can make your way here in the Saving Death sub-constellation at 20 points, you're going to reduce damage taken by non-players by 10%. This will dramatically increase your survivability. So as a new player, don't worry so much about the damage slottables. Worry about this passive and then start adding the damage slottables. For damage slottables at endgame, I'll give you a setup, but remember that your shield is going to scale off of max magic. And remember that your Living Dark and some of your abilities are going to scale off of spell damage. So those are a couple of good options to take straight out the gate, like Untamed Aggression, because your effectiveness is going to scale and you can get it pretty easily. Let's assume you're progressing through the game and you want to end game loadout. These are the 4 that I go with. In the blue tree, I go with Fighting Finesse, increasing crit damage and crit healing done. Deadly Aim, increasing your damage done with single target attacks, think light attack weaving. Master of Arms, increasing your damage done with direct damage attacks. Then Thaumaturge with the flex spot here. This increases your damage done with damage over time. You can swap this out for like Untamed Aggression, Wrathful Strikes, or whatever you feel you need on this specific spot. Next up is the Red tree. The key with this one is you want to make your way to Siphoning Spells, which is quite a ways away. As a new player, you got 3 slottables in the top left corner that you can get straight away. Boundless Vitality, increasing your max health. Fortified, increasing your armor, which is going to reduce damage taken, and Rejuvenation. This is going to increase your resource sustain, so you don't need to follow a path. I would prioritize speccing into those evenly until you can make your way over to Siphoning Spells, which restores 300 magic per stage whenever you kill an enemy. Also, something else, when you start maxing out your champion points, go with the Bastion. Increases your effectiveness of damage shields and damage shields against enemies. So at endgame, completely mid-max, what I would go with is Siphoning Spells, Boundless Vitality, Bastion, and Fortified. Next up is the green tree. It really doesn't affect performance that much. The thing that I found the most helpful starting out is working my way through the green tree to Treasure Hunter. This is going to increase the quality of items you find in treasure chests. This just makes it so much easier farming gear, getting specific weapons and destruction staffs and jewelry pieces. I found this really advantageous. The other 3 that I go with is Liquid Efficiency. Whenever you drink a potion or a poison, you have a 10% chance not consuming it. Rationer adds 10 minutes to the duration of food or drink, increasing your character stats per stage. And then Steed's Blessing, increasing your out of combat movement speed. Now let's talk about the racial choices. Don't freak out about racial choices. I have a separate video about that breaks everything down. I prefer the High Elf. Reason being is that passive that's kind of unique. When you are using ability that casts or channel 5% less damage, that's totally unique, and it's also going to give you a lot of max magic and a lot of spell damage. If you were kind of skeptical and didn't know if you wanted to play Stam or Magic, I would go with the Dunmer as a backup, because that's going to give you both max magic, max stamina, and spell and weapon damage with fire resistance. For the attributes, it makes a lot of sense to get 64 max magic. If you're going to play the gear loadout that I gave you with the food choices I'm going to give you, you should be at 20 to 22,000 max health, and that should be plenty. Mundus Stone choices, you do have some options. At endgame, I use the Thief, which is going to increase our crit strike rating. This is going to help with your crit healing and your crit damage done. Remember, we talked about max magicka and max spell damage increases the effectiveness or two survivability abilities. So don't be afraid to swap those out, or even the Atronach for resource sustain when you're struggling. And then consumables. Number one food that you can get that's very expensive is Clockwork Citrus for Life. This is going to increase your max health by a lot, increase health recovery, max magic, and magic recovery. But there's a cheaper option that I'd highly recommend going with, and that's Witch Mother's Brew. It's going to increase everything as well, but not nearly to the amount, but it's just 10 times as cheap. Now, at the end game, you're going to want to run Essence of Spell Power Potions. This is going to give you 100% uptime on Major Sorcery, increasing your spell damage, and Major Prophecy, increasing your spell critical rating. Something to note here is the medicinal use passive in alchemy is very handy to level up and put 3 skill points in, because that's going to extend the duration to 47.6 seconds, meaning a potion has a 45-second cooldown, so you can get 100% uptime, but you have to have medicinal use first to do it. If you don't have these fancy potions, you can always slot a skill like Degeneration on your back bar to get that spell damage buff, but most endgame players do this for this specific reason. You can also buy the potions in Cyrodiil if you like the PvP. That's a cheaper alternative. Well, gang, that's a long-winded discussion on what I think is the best beginner build in the Elder Scrolls Online. I hope you got something out of this. Templar is my favorite class, probably in any game all time. I absolutely love it. It's born to par is my tagline, and I think it works very, very well for a new player and also as an advanced player doing a crap ton of damage in both PvE and PvP. So if you need some extra guides and resources, check the important links in the description below. I also have cards in the top right you can click on that will have some other links to builds and videos to help you progress. Thank you so much for watching.